Hello everyone, Andrew here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Super Nintendo. So I figured since last week I talked about the N64, and I'd really planned on talking about the Super Nintendo in between the NES and the N64, but I had a request to do a video with the N64, so I just did that. But then I figured that this week I should probably come back to the Super Nintendo since there's quite a few things I wanted to say about it too. But yeah, anyway, so what I'm holding up here is pretty much like the main box that you could buy your Super Nintendo with. And this it didn't come with any games or anything like that. It came with a controller. And if we look on the back here, we can see a whole bunch of neat games that were out at the time when this box was available. It says Star Fox is new. And that's awesome. And you have Mario World, Super Mario Kart, Zelda, whole bunch of awesome games there that were available for the Super Nintendo. So yeah, that's the box. But if we look here, we have the console. And so this is the main Super Nintendo console that pretty much everyone has or had. What's it called? It's not like the N64 where there's a ton of different colors and variations for it. Like the NES and the SNES, there wasn't very much variety as far as the console went out there. But yeah, so here you go. You have the power switch right here on this side. So that just slides up and down for turning it off and on. And the reset button is just a switch that you push up to reset. You have the eject button, which if you saw my NES video, my video on the Nintendo Entertainment System, or sorry, yeah, the Famicom was actually a separate video. If you see my video on the Famicom, which is the Japanese variation of the Nintendo Entertainment System, you'll see that that actually had an eject mechanism. So that sort of carried on to the Super Nintendo. And so yeah, basically that will eject your games. Is if you look inside, pressing that eject button, you probably can't see it in the video, but it pushes these things up, which will push the cartridge out of the slot. But yeah. So that's pretty much the front of the Super Nintendo. If we look on the back, we have our power. In the middle we have RF. And then on the other side here, we have our AV ports. That would actually let you go into your red, yellow, and white ports on your TV, which pretty much overall gave you better sound and picture quality. Looking on the bottom, we're going to see something that will sound familiar to what I talked about for the N64, and that is an extension port on the bottom. And just like the N64, and just like the NES, it was never used in North America. Unfortunately, it was used in Japan, which I will get to when we talk about the Super Famicom. But yeah, another port on the bottom of the console that was never used in North America. It's really interesting. I mean, you wonder why they kept trying to make things for the bottom if they weren't if they had a constant thing of not being successful in Japan. I mean, it's just interesting that they would keep trying it. I mean, obviously the Genesis didn't have the right idea with the CD and 32X, all those crazy add-ons. So I don't know why they were always trying to create some kind of crazy add-on that they thought would take off, but in the end, never actually did. So yeah, that is the console. As far as the controller goes, I forgot it over here, so we're going to grab that now. I'm sure everyone has seen one of these, but this is your Super Nintendo controller. So basically, it goes from having 4 buttons on the NES controller, and now we're up to a total of 8. You have your awesome A, B, Y, and X buttons over here. You have your same start and select buttons, and on the top, you even have shoulder buttons, which weren't used too much. They were used in a few games. I mean, Super Mario World, you could adjust the camera and things like that, and there were some other games where they were used too. But yeah, I really, really like the Super Nintendo controller. I still think it's one of the greatest controllers ever made. And it's definitely been one of the most innovative, because this sort of diamond of buttons here, that's something that every major console has these days on their controller. I mean, if you look at the PlayStation controller, it has that button formation. Xbox, the Dreamcast, they all have this diamond of buttons, and that was originally made by Nintendo. And yeah, it definitely works. It's definitely very comfortable to hold. So I mean, it's definitely understandable that a lot of people would use it. I definitely like it more than the Sega Genesis is. Sort of just line of ABC buttons. I definitely like this. Very comfortable. Very good. And overall, I like the Super Nintendo controller very much. I think it's awesome. As far as the games go, this is what your typical Super Nintendo cartridge is going to look like. So here we have a Mario World. And there's actually a variation of this cartridge. Like this one here. And as you'll see, this one sort of has an indent in it. While this one, it's more just a solid surface. I'm not quite sure why they made that change, but yeah. Just something interesting to note. I don't really go for variations like this. I just like to have one of each game in my collection. Although Mario World is so common that, I mean, I just came across it, so I picked it up anyway. But it is interesting to note that there is a cartridge variation like that out there that some people might not be aware of. But yeah, so basically, I think that's all I really wanted to say about the North American version of the console stuff. I kind of get uncentered sometimes when I'm grabbing stuff all over the place. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say about the console. But now what I want to do is I want to move on and talk about the Japanese console, the Super Famicom. And as you'll see, just like the Japanese N64 and the Famicom, this is another thing where it's just styrofoam on the bottom with a cardboard top, and that's not because I'm missing the bottom, that's actually just how it is. And if we take that lid off, we'll look inside, and here is the Super Famicom. It actually came with 2 controllers, and the console is not supposed to be that yellow. Unfortunately, it's really weird, and I guess I could talk about this before going on to the Super Famicom. It's weird how Super Nintendo's had a really major problem with yellowing. I mean, NES's do it a bit, but Super Nintendo's are really bad. I mean, look at this one I have here. That doesn't look anything like the Super Nintendo I showed before. And that's not because Nintendo released a special yellow edition of the Super Nintendo. It's just, the plastic was really weird. And it's interesting how everything's gone yellow except sort of this part in the middle here, which actually stayed gray. I mean, I don't know if that's because they used a different kind of plastic or something. But yeah, if you don't want your Super Nintendo to go yellow like that, my point of advice is to keep it out of the sun, because I think that speeds up the process. But anyway, you can even kind of look inside the Super Nintendo, since this is actually a broken one. And you can see all the crazy stuff that goes on inside there. And the back is actually completely destroyed. But, yeah. Anyway, yeah, broken Super Nintendo, but yeah, keep them out of the sun if you don't want them to go yellow like that. But anyway, so Super Famicom, that's the box. And we can have a look at the console here. Definitely not very close to the Super Nintendo. It's definitely not like the Famicom, where it's in a completely different league. But the Super Famicom definitely doesn't look exactly like the Super Nintendo, as the Japanese Nintendo 64 look just like the North American and the European Nintendo 64s. But if we look on the front, we see we still have all the main basic things. We have our on and off switch there, we have our eject, and we have reset, which is a button, rather than something that we slide up. Cartridge slot is a different shape, which you'll see in a minute. And also, if we look on the back, we can see that expansion port that the original Super Nintendo had, and the Super Famicom, of course, originally had. The main difference is that the Super Famicom one was actually used in that there was actually the Nintendo Saddle View, which was kind of like the Sega Channel. And if you don't know what either of those things are, it kind of allowed you to download games and play them on your so you could download special games and things like that. There was a neat Zelda that you could download, and I think there was even new levels for Mario 2 or something crazy like that you could just download through the internet and then play on your console. So that was actually really neat. Although unfortunately it never came here, because I guess it wasn't overly popular in Japan, and they didn't see any point on bringing it to North America. The Super Famicom controller is a bit different than the Super Nintendo controller, as you can see, the layout is exactly the same. This one's yellowing a bit too. I don't know why all my Super Famicom stuff likes to yellow. But yeah, the buttons are really neat colors. If you look in the special world of Super Mario World, you will actually see this symbol, which is the Super Famicom logo, at the top of the world of the map screen. Special world and Super Mario World, which I said. And that those colors are also carried over to the controller here. Interesting thing, though, is that on your Super Nintendo controller, the Y and X buttons actually dip down a bit, while the B and A buttons are they have more of a curve on top. The Y and X buttons dip down so that your thumb can really get into them, you get a good grip. None of the buttons on the Super Famicom controller are like that, and they all have the bumpy surface, which actually makes it a little bit less comfortable, I think. I like the Super Nintendo controllers and the way you can gently rest your thumb in there. But luckily, they both have the exact same end, so you can use Super Famicom controllers on your Super Nintendo, and vice versa, which is really good, so you can use whichever one you want, as long as you have whichever one you want at your disposal. As far as the Super Famicom games go, this is what your typical Super Famicom cartridge looks like. Definitely not the same. I'm going to grab one of the North American ones here. As the North American one, it has a curved surface, which allows it to fit into the curved door on the Super Famicom, but that extra little bit of curve in the front makes it sometimes a bit more difficult to get into your Super Nintendo. I believe it's more of an issue for the Super Nintendo too. Although what really stops you from playing the Super Famicom games on your Super Nintendo is the back. So look at the back of this one, and look at the back of this one. You'll notice that it has these grooves here. And so just like the Nintendo 64, there's not really any region locking in the software. It's more of a hardware thing, where because there's tabs inside the cartridge slot, you won't be able to put this into your Super Nintendo because of there's no holes there. And also, you won't be able to put this one into your Super Famicom, because I had it a bit backwards earlier. Because of the way it gets narrow on the sides, you aren't able to fit the cartridge in correctly. So yeah. So that was sort of their region locking again. Of course you could bypass this region locking with things like the Megacom converter or the Honeybee converter, which was a popular converter company, and then you just put whichever console, whichever type of cartridge you want in here, and then this will fit in both your Super Famicom and your Super Nintendo, so that you can play your games in either one. The converter looks weird. These things on the side, that's actually so that when you press the eject button, only the game in the converter would pop up, and the whole converter wouldn't come out of the Super Nintendo. It's kind of pointless, because I just normally take the whole thing out when I'm changing games anyway. But whatever. I guess if you want to do that, it's at least useful for it. Another interesting thing to note is that this is a European Super Mario World game, and it looks, the cartridge shape is just like the Super Famicom one, and that's interesting because this is a European copy of Super Mario Bros. For the NES, and then everyone should know that it looks just like the North American one, while the Japanese one is a completely different shape. So it's interesting that for the NES, European and North American carts are the same, while the Japanese one is different, but for the Super Nintendo, Japanese and European carts are the same, and North American ones are different. I don't know why they do that. I don't know how they decide which shape they want to take. I guess it's whichever one they like more. But anyway. And I also have a Korean Super Comboy Super Mario World cartridge here. And that one takes on the shape of the Super Famicom and European Super Nintendo shape as well. But yeah. Also, one more thing I should point out for the console itself is that, like the NES, where there was a smaller version that came out later, the Super Nintendo also had that, and people usually call this the Super Nintendo 2 or the toaster version of the Super Nintendo, and it was a bit smaller. The controller stayed the same, unlike the NES. Well, pretty much the same anyway. There's a bit of a difference. Something fell there, but it's okay. There's a small difference, but as you can see, it is a bit smaller. The button here, you have the on and off button, and the reset button became a switch. I have a game in there, just because. But yeah, if you look on the bottom, no more extension port, because I guess at this point they realized they weren't going to use it, and I'm sure taking out that extra hardware makes it easier to compact it into a nice small console. And there's no RF option on the back now. It's either AV or go buy a new TV, pretty much. And one more thing I forgot to mention about the console itself is you might notice that the fronts of the games have this sort of a groove here on the front, like where my finger is there. That's not just, I mean, it's kind of a design thing. And you probably won't be able to see this on camera, but when you turn it on, you actually have this piece that comes out. And that is meant to hold the cartridge in place. And that's why this is here, because that piece that comes out will go into there so that you can't pull it out or put a new cartridge in while the console is on. My Super Famicom has that. Some versions of the Super Nintendo have that too. Earlier ones, not later ones. This one doesn't, although instead, there's just a button on, there's just a sticker on it that says do not insert or remove cartridges while the console is on. But yeah, earlier Super Nintendos will have that. The Super Nintendo 2 does not have that. But yeah, so this is the Super Nintendo 2, as I can take the game out that I was playing very recently, and it's actually why it's still in there, because this is the one that I had hooked up to the TV. I don't know, can you even read what the game name is on there? Maybe not. Yeah, playing Pocky and Rocky 2. It's an awesome game. Just picked that up recently, actually. Not very easy to come by. But anyway, I believe that's all I wanted to say about the consoles. We went over the cartridges now. I believe we're going to move on to a few accessories. It's definitely not like the Nintendo 64, where there are a ton of different accessories. Well, I mean, there's still a lot of accessories, but I don't have as many to show as I did for the N64. But yeah, anyway, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to show is the Super Multi-Tap. I don't know if there was actually an official Nintendo-made multi-tap for the Super Nintendo. I mean, I know that there was the 4-score and the satellite for the NES, and the N64 just had 4 controller slots built in. But anyway, this is one made by Hudson, and it lets you play 4 players on your Super Nintendo. And there's a few games that supported that, so that is pretty neat. And yeah, you obviously need that, since the controllers aren't all built in. The next thing I want to show, so just like the NES had the Zapper, the Super Nintendo had a gun too, although it definitely much bigger than the Zapper, and that is the Super Scope. As you can see, it's like a huge bazooka thing. A lot of people will probably know about this from Super Smash Brothers, as it is an item in that you can use to attack other people, and that was in the box. But here's what I have here. This one is actually my worst one. The box one is complete. This one is complete, with the exception that there's no rubber piece on the eye on the end here of the eyepiece that you're supposed to be able to put your eye against so it doesn't get hurt by the plastic. So that's missing from this one. But anyway, a huge gun thing here. A lot of people think that the shoot button, you can't see it, is actually down here, but that's not true. The fire button is actually this big purple button on top, so that just makes it even more like a bazooka. And then you have, of course, the scope comes from aiming and by looking through the scope. So yeah, that's the Super Scope. There was a few games that used it, like Mario Safari and the packed-in, I almost said Menacer game, Super Scope 6 game. But overall, it wasn't nearly as good as the Zapper, in my opinion, just with the easy to use and also the amount of games that were available for it and how fun those games were overall. The Super Nintendo actually did have one more light gun, although this isn't really a Nintendo-made gun. This went with Konami's Lethal Enforcer game, and it's just a nice blue sort of a handgun, which is really nice to use, although I believe this is the only game that ever used it. So unfortunately, it's a nice gun, but it overall doesn't get much use other than for that one game. Next thing I'm going to show is there was a game for Super Nintendo called Mario Paint, and some people might be familiar with this. It's been featured in a few things, like there's a WarioWare mini game based off it, and things like that, or you might have just heard about it. An interesting thing about, and also a lot of people like to use it to make really awesome music, or like remixes of other songs and post it on YouTube. But anyway, so yeah, Mario Paint, and that came with a mouse pad and mouse back in the days when they had the rollerballs on the bottom and not actually, they weren't lasers, so they weren't as nice. But yeah, so basically you use that to like draw pictures and things like that, and it was overall pretty neat. So there's that, and this is also the Super Famicom variation, although this doesn't come with Mario Paint, so I mean, I guess in Japan you could buy it separately or something, in case you lost it, or I actually don't know what the story behind that is, but anyway, there's the Japanese version in the box without a game. And I think I keep getting uncentered. I'm sorry about that. Just getting so excited and grabbing things from every direction. So yeah, there's the mouse and mouse pad, and I believe there's two more things I want to show. And this one is quite interesting, and a lot of people probably don't know about this, not that it's really that great or anything. And that is the X-Band. And what this lets you do is this actually let you take your Super Nintendo online to play against other people. So way before the current generation today, and before even the last generation and Sega Net and things like that, Super Nintendo was online. So yeah, cool, right? The only problem is that this only worked. Yeah, so basically it's like a cartridge you put in, you put the game on top, then you can hook it up to the internet on the side. The only problem was that it only worked with games that were compatible. And while that might not still sound so bad, the real problem is that only like one game was compatible with it. It was like a boxing game or something like that, I believe. And you could also use it to like send messages to your friends and things like that. But of course you had to like subscribe to it, and it was kind of a pain. But anyway, it was online. There was like one online game for the Super Nintendo. If you had this, you had the game, you had an internet connection, you were subscribed to this, and you had $1 million, you could have gone online with your Super Nintendo. But overall, it was a pretty big flop. And yeah, so basically not very many games were made compatible with it, as it didn't do super well, I believe. But yeah, and the very last thing that I want to show for the Super Nintendo is my collection of ROM makers. I mean, I don't understand why these things for the Super Nintendo are so common. I mean, you have like the Game Doctor SF here, where the disc just goes into it. This one here, you put your game in the top, although you have to connect a separate floppy disk drive to it. And we have this one here, which is my favorite and by far the best one that I have. The Super UFO, where you put the game in, it has the thing on the side. And yeah, overall, this one works great. And on top of being able to make discs for your, put your Super Famicom games to disc, it also has a few other neat features in it, like it has a controller tester, where you just open up the menu and you can press the buttons on your controller, and it will tell you when they're working and stuff like that. So it helps you find out if your Super Nintendo controllers are working. I mean, of course you can just turn on a game and play with it for a bit, but it's just nice and convenient, and I actually use it from time to time to test out my controllers. And then what we have here is a case of discs. I actually have like 4 more of these. It's interesting because every time I buy one of these things, I always get like a whole case of discs with it. But yeah, like right here, it's pretty much, you know, your old ancient floppy disks. We have Super Mario All-Stars Part 1 of 2 here. So yeah, I mean, these disc makers, they're not really needed today since, I mean, everything's out there on the internet now. But it is interesting because if you have a game on a disc, you could go use it on another, like if someone gave you a game on a disc and you had one of these disc copiers, you could go home and then you could just play that game on the disc. And of course, who wants to do that? I mean, the point of getting the game is that you can add it to your collection and stuff like that. Plus, there'd be really no point to doing anything like that these days. But yeah, I believe that's it for the Super Nintendo. I think I talked about everything. We talked about the console, the difference between regions. I actually don't know too much about the European Super Nintendo. It's interesting that I don't know a lot about the European variations of things because it's actually, I find a lot of Japanese imports here, like without actually having to order them online, but you rarely see European things here. And I think that's because it's really hard to use European things in North America because the different plugs and the different power and things like that, unlike Japanese things, which have the same plugs, and you don't really need to worry too much about power conversion here, because unless you play things for like a week straight, you're probably not going to have an issue. But yeah, so I don't really know too much about the European variation. I know that the European Super Nintendo looks more like the Super Famicom, although I think it's a bit more colorful. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say for today. So hopefully that answers just about all the questions you've ever might have had about the Super Nintendo. There's probably some other accessories I didn't show. I didn't tear apart the whole shelf. Well, actually, it looks pretty bare right now. But I also had other box sets for the Super Nintendo too. Like I know there's a Donkey Kong Country one which I don't have, although I do have one that comes with Mario World and one that comes with the Mario All Stars plus Mario World cartridge, and that one's actually pretty rare. But anyway, yeah, I think I've covered everything, hopefully. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So I think that's it. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you have questions about anything I covered, or if questions about something I maybe didn't cover, just post comments down below, and you guys know I love to answer and reply to comments and things like that, so that shouldn't be any problem. So yeah, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time.